Back when I was just a beginner when it comes to growing succulents, I've heard it more than once in several people saying that these plants can only grow in climates that have a colder temperature, much like in the highlands here in the Philippines, in Baguio or in Benguet. Now, I wouldn't blame them for thinking that way because succulents are really easier to grow in those locations where they have lower temperatures all year long, and they will be particularly easier to grow there. You wouldn't see a lot of them rotting in those areas. So a lot of people will actually think that succulents are just for those locations. But right now, I think that we need to expand our thinking. We need to widen our thinking, because you might probably have already seen a lot of people growing succulents in the lowlands and having success with them. Still, if you're worrying about the temperatures that you have in your area, in your location, probably in the Philippines or probably in other countries as well, if you think that it's too hot for succulents in your area, then I hope that this video will help you. I will be giving you some tips on how I manage the temperatures in my location, and hopefully this will also give you an idea on how you would manage your garden as well. If you're new to the channel, welcome to Kalay Plants. My name is Mark, and this is my greenhouse, and these are the succulents that I'm currently taking care of. And for this video, we're going to be talking about what is the best temperature for succulents. Now, if you really want to learn more, please continue watching until the end, and also please don't forget to hit the like and subscribe on this video. Now, when it comes to temperatures, not all succulents have the same tolerance when it comes to varying temperatures. Some succulents will tolerate freezing temperatures pretty well, while some succulents wouldn't want to have freezing temperatures on them. Some succulents can also tolerate a little bit of heat, while some other succulents doesn't like a lot of heat. Now, how would you identify which succulents can tolerate cold and which succulents can tolerate hot temperatures? Now, if you're really a beginner when it comes to growing succulents, there are a lot of different varieties of succulents. There are also cacti. Some cacti can tolerate freezing temperatures, while some others cannot, so you might want to research on that. But currently, I'm going to be focusing on this type of succulents, the rosette type of ones. So what you're seeing here, what they're being called currently are soft succulents. So soft succulents cannot tolerate freezing temperatures. They can handle temperatures that are comfortable for people, about 18 degrees to 24 degrees Celsius. So I will just probably be posting a conversion of that to Fahrenheit. So what temperatures are good for us, for people, will also be good generally for these type of succulents. Now, if the temperature goes very low for very long, so if it gets freezing temperatures on these succulents, they will become dormant, and some of them can get frost damage. So the cells of these plants will get frozen if you leave them in a freezing temperature for very long. So that will damage your plants, and that could look like it's rotting, or it could look like it's burning. Now also, if you leave this type of succulents, the Crassulaceae, in very hot temperatures for very long, they can also get burned. So they don't like temperatures that go well way above 30 degrees or 27 or 28 or 30 degrees Celsius. Some other type of succulents can handle some heat pretty well without having a lot of damage or a lot of problems. So I have here an example of a Haworthia and an aloe. Now, these are not the usual type of succulents that you would see when it comes to looking at succulents online or Instagram. They're not the most popular ones, but these are very popular when it comes to those who are really collecting more expensive plants. So Haworthias, aloes, these plants came from Africa. They are not from Mexico, much like with these other succulents that you're seeing here. Generally, they come from Mexico. These ones came from Africa, where they get much more hotter temperatures. So that means these succulents can tolerate a lot more heat than these ones. I wouldn't say that they can tolerate double the heat of these ones, but I would say that they can tolerate a little bit higher temperatures than these succulents. Now, I would also say that these are not hardy succulents. These are not frost-tolerant succulents, because they came from Africa, and we don't have freezing temperatures in Africa. So these succulents, the Haworthias and aloes, some of them can also get frost damage if you leave them in very low temperatures for very long, in freezing temperatures. So they will also get damaged. So you might also want to give them protection when it comes to that. But generally, if freezing temperatures is not a problem in your area, then you will have success with this. Even if it gets a little bit hotter, these succulents doesn't have a lot of problem when it comes to desiccation. Now, the desiccation, I would say, is an adaptation of these succulents to survive very hot temperatures for very long. A lot of succulents actually that you're seeing here will drop their leaves if you leave them in very hot temperatures for very long, because they are using up the water storage that they have in their leaves. So some of them because they are dormant, they will not be growing a lot. They will also be shedding their leaves if it gets too hot for them for very long. So you might also want to take that into consideration. If it really gets too hot in your area, some succulents will really dry out their leaves and will not grow a lot if it gets too hot. So I think that's a problem when it comes to a lot of beginners growing these succulents here in the Philippines, because they have trouble if their succulents are dropping their leaves. But most of the time, they don't really need to be watered. They just drop their leaves as a survival method so that they can cope with the heat. So they're using up the moisture that they have in their leaves. Now, I probably already have given you some ideas when it comes to dormancy with these succulents. So they don't like too hot or too cold temperatures. They like to be just in the middle. So that's when you will be seeing a lot of growth on these succulents if you have these mild temperatures in your area for a prolonged amount of time. So for example, if you're getting temperatures like 20 to 23, 24 degrees, and if you're getting that temperature for about a month, so you will actually see a lot of your succulents growing actively. Now, succulents, I would also say that they are full sun, low temperature, and drought tolerant plants. So they like to get a lot of sun for an extended amount of time, and they also like to get cold temperatures, and they also don't like to get watered very often. So even if they're in those areas which gets low temperatures, they also don't like to be overwatered, so they will still need to dry out before you water them. But usually if you're living in those areas, because the humidity is very low, they can dry up very quickly, which makes succulents grow even faster. Now, if you're living in the Philippines, humidity will also be your problem, because if you get hot temperatures and if you leave them wet for very long, the succulents can stay in a very humid condition, and that will actually stunt their growth because they don't like to be in a very humid condition, which is why we're actually studying a good type of potting mix here in the Philippines compared with other countries, which they can just use ordinary bagged potting mixes on their plants and their succulents can thrive. But here in the Philippines, we really need to add drainage so that we don't put our succulents in too much of a humid situation. Now, if you're taking in the info that I said when it comes to growing succulents and the temperatures that they like, you might think that it's very difficult for them to grow in the Philippines, in a tropical area where we get temperatures like consistent 30 degrees temperatures. So you might be thinking that might be a problem, but actually what I found out, if you give your succulents some amount of protection, like the greenhouse that I have here, it has a shade net on top of it that actually drastically changes the temperatures that your succulents are getting, because they're getting protection from the sun, so they're getting diffused light, and that means that the temperature they get is much more lower. Now, if you're in the middle of the day, if it gets too hot in the middle of the day, the greenhouse can also get a little bit hot. But what I would say, if the hottest part of the day has already passed, if you're already way past into a midday, or if you're already in the afternoon, the inside of the greenhouse will get much more cooler, much more quicker than if it was outside. So a greenhouse really helps when it comes to succulents to manage the temperature that they're getting, which is why I found a lot more success when it comes to growing succulents once I had this greenhouse built. So that is one option that you might want to consider if you're planning to grow succulents in the long term. Now, some of you people might not be as avid of a collector as I am, so you might not want to grow this much varieties of succulents, so you might not have to grow this much succulents that you're seeing here. You might only want to grow a handful of them. Now, if you want to grow just a handful of them, and if you have a sunny balcony area that is facing south or facing east, then you can probably get away with growing a handful of succulents. Now, if you only have that area, I would not recommend that you buy a lot of succulents because they will be competing for space. So as I said before, they are full sun plants, and a lot of these succulents will want to get as much sun as they can. So if you give them a lot of sun, you might not want to have a lot of succulents so that they will not be competing each other for space in your sunny area. They can get rot if they don't get consistent sun. Now, I would also say that sun is much more important than temperatures. Now, if you're growing them in a balcony situation where they get partial sun, then the temperature might not be an issue with you because they're only getting sun for parts of the day. But that can particularly be a problem if your house is facing west or if your balcony is facing west, which will get afternoon sun. Now, usually here in the Philippines, we get rain usually during the afternoon. So if your succulents are facing west, so they're getting sun during the afternoon, but if it's already raining, then they might not be getting enough sun that they need. So you might not want to grow succulents in a west facing or in a north facing location in your house. You might want to grow them in an east or a south facing location. Now, if you're not getting a lot of rain, you can also put them outside, but you might want to put them under a tree so that they can get some amount of protection. Now, I believe some succulents can survive under a tree, but really, if you have the space outside for it, just build a greenhouse. But if you don't, and if you're just starting out with succulents, then just start out with a handful. If you also want to grow a lot more, then I would also recommend that you put them under grow lights. And if they're indoors and they're not really getting morning sun, they're just getting their light from grow lights, then the temperature can also be moderated. Because if you're growing them indoors, then the temperature will naturally be at the temperature that is comfortable for people. So if it's already comfortable for you indoors, then it will also be comfortable for succulents, just as long as you're supplanting their light with grow lights. Now, we would also say that if you're growing them under grow lights, you might not want to give them much of a direct sun location. So grow them in a location that gets shaded, but supplant their light with grow lights, but no longer with actual sun. Because if you give them direct sun and then you're giving them grow lights, then I think that your succulents will be overstressed. They will get overheated because of the light and the sun that they're getting. So if you're growing them under lights, then you might not want to give them sunlight anymore. Probably you can give them ambient light, but not a lot of direct sunlight if you're already growing them with grow lights. Now, if you're already growing succulents in an outdoor situation, outdoor location like I have here, then you might notice that not all of them will grow evenly at the same time all year long, because succulents really have this dormancy period and they also have this active growing period. And I would say that a lot of these soft succulents, they will be more active during the parts of the year where you get mildest temperatures, where you get the mildest temperatures, and that is usually around spring or around autumn. Now, here in the Philippines, we don't get through winter seasons, we don't get freezing temperatures, but we also have this spring and this autumn season where we get much more milder temperatures because of the amount of sun exposure that we're getting. So, for example, if you're just past the rainy season, if you just exited the rainy season, if you're going into summer, you might experience these sunny days that doesn't get too hot but also doesn't get a lot of rain. So that is spring here in the Philippines. We don't get a lot of rain, but we get cold temperatures, and we also get a lot of sun. Now, that is the temperature that is the best for growing succulents. They will have much more growth, higher growth rates when you grow them during the spring season. Now, I believe that earlier this year I've had a lot of growth with my succulents, and then when it got hot, their growth slowed down. So I would say that is true with all succulents, no matter or generally this type of succulents. Now, if you're transitioning into the summer period, or if it gets too hot in your area, cacti will actually be growing a lot more compared with succulents. So if you're if it's in the middle of the summer and you're watching this video, then you might want to have much more cacti than succulents, because cacti will be much more active in the middle of the summer, while these succulents will be much more active in spring or in autumn. Now, I would also say that they get dormant during the colder parts of the year, during the winter. I've been growing succulents for about 2 years now. I'm going into my second year of growing succulents. So I'm going into my second year of growing succulents, and I find that during the coldest part of the year, they will actually go dormant as well. They will not be producing a lot of growth. If it gets continuous rainy weather in the year, or if it's the season, or if it's the rainy season, then they will not be growing a lot. So you might also not want to water them a lot. Now, when it comes to watering these succulents and their temperature, so we've already spoken about the types of succulents. We've already spoken about the location that you have for them. Now, we're going to talk about the watering. Succulents will actually go dormant if it gets too hot, so you might not want to give them a lot of watering during that time. But I would also say that here in the greenhouse, they don't go dormant very quickly. I can see that they're still growing even if it gets hot because of the protection that they have. Back in the day when I didn't have a greenhouse, actually a lot of my succulents were dormant for a long time because of the consistent heat that they're getting. But with the greenhouse, I find that a lot of my succulents are continuously growing. I've said it before, this Graptopetalum, you can see here, it's very lush. It has a lot of leaves. So it started producing that when I transferred here in the greenhouse. But way back when it wasn't in a greenhouse, they weren't producing this much of growth. So now, if you're planning to grow succulents, and if you're planning to grow them big, and if you really want them to grow not just as a decor in your house, then you really want to invest in a greenhouse. But if you're just using them as decorations, then you can get away with not watering them a lot and in a balcony situation, so they can survive, but they will not be growing a lot. So I would say that a south facing greenhouse will be the most ideal place to grow these succulents. Now also, as I said before, you might not want to water them consistently during the hottest time of the year and during the coldest time of the year. But if you're getting these prolonged amounts of cold temperature, or if you're getting these mild temperatures for a very long time, then you might see your succulents growing a little bit more. So now what I found out, if you have summer rain, so if it's in the middle of the summer and you're getting rain, then those times succulents can actually have a burst in growth. They can grow very quickly, but you might want to be careful because you don't want them to get rot. And also, if you're getting into spring and autumn, and if you're getting these extended amounts of time when it rains a lot but it's not very dark during the spring and during the autumn period, then you might want to water your succulents and they will produce growth. But you don't want to grow if you don't want to water them a lot, because you will also be getting rot. So you really have to be mindful of the temperatures and the sunlight that you're getting as you're watering your succulents. Now you might be thinking there's a lot of things to consider when it comes to growing succulents. Yes, there is a lot of things to consider actually if you want to grow them very successfully. And the temperatures is just one of the things that you might want to consider, because you still have the sunlight and the potting mix problem to deal with when it comes to growing succulents. Now if your succulents are dying even before they get 2 months, or within 3 months, or within 5 months in your care, and they're already dying and they're already deteriorating, then you might have a problem when it comes to your potting mix and the sunlight that you're having, not the temperatures. Because succulents can actually survive a little bit of hot temperatures. As long as they have the right type of potting mix on them, they can actually tolerate some hot temperatures. But if you're really if you're killing your succulents for about 5 months after buying them, then that means you have to change your care, or you might want to change the succulent that you're currently caring for. Because if you don't want to research a lot, and if you don't want to study a lot of for this type of succulents, then you might just continuously kill them. But if you don't want to study a lot and you still want to grow succulents, then you might want to grow these much more easier to care for: Haworthias, aloes, and Gasterias. These African type of succulents, they can tolerate a lot more heat than your usual Crassulaceae type of succulents. But still, if you really like this rosette type of succulents that has a lot of arena, then you can get away with growing them. You just really have to consider the temperature that you're having, the weather that you're having, and when is the best time to buy them, and when is the best time to water them, and when is the best time to not water them. So you really have to consider that, so that you can keep your succulents growing. And also you have to consider the sunlight, the heat that they're getting. You might want to give them some protection with the heat. But if you consider this information, really, you will have success with succulents. Because what you're seeing here, actually, this is the most success that I've had with succulents, and you can see that they're already filling their pots. Okay, so it is possible. It's possible to grow succulents even if it gets too hot in your area. And I've seen some other YouTubers as well in the lowlands, and they have success with their succulents. Now, I would also just want to add that you might want to avoid one type of a growing situation or growing location when it comes to growing succulents in the tropics. You might want to avoid the semi-protected areas. Now, I've had a semi-protected area, and it's a plant shelf that I've had that is roofed on the top but doesn't have protection on the side. So during that time when I was still using it, my succulents were getting rained on and some of them were dying. I would recommend that if you really plan to grow your succulents in an area, you want to give them full protection, not half protection. I've also watched this video by Desert Succulent recently, and he showed a lot of his succulents dying because of the rainy season that he've had, and his succulents were dying because they were getting rain, but also they have some protection with the sun. So that is actually a problem, because if your plants are semi-protected, their humidity levels inside will get too high. So they can get very humid in there. So that can also contribute to them rotting. So if you don't want your succulents to have a lot of humidity, and if you want to give them some protection, just give them a full protection. So a full covering of like a greenhouse like this one. So this place actually doesn't get rained on. So you might have seen my videos where I showed you that I'm vlogging here in the greenhouse and it's not getting rained on inside. It's raining outside, but it's not getting rained on here in the inside. So that is actually better for succulents than semi-protected areas. So if you have a plant shop that you're just placing a roof on and it's not fully protected, then your succulents can still have problems when it comes to rain. They can get a rot. So if you don't want your succulents getting rot in the semi-protected areas, you might just want to grow your succulents in a full sun, full rain location, because if they're out in the open with no protection, they can get a lot of air circulation and then they can get the maximum amount of light that they need during the rainy season. So with the maximum amount of diffused light that they're getting, they can grow a lot more, they can be much more active. But if you're putting them in a semi-protected area and it's already cloudy and they're not getting enough sun and they're getting rained on, then that can contribute to them getting rot. So I would recommend you just choose one, give them full rain or shine location, or give them full protection during the rainy season. So that is the only option you have. You might not want to put them in a semi-protected area. So if it gets rainy for very long and if you don't want them to get rained on, you can just put them inside, or if you don't have the space for it, you can just move them inside where they will be protected from the rain, and then you can bring them out again if it's already getting sunnier. But if you don't want to worry too much, you can just put them outside. So you might want to decide to just leave them outside during the rainy season and let them get rained on and let some of them survive and let some of them die. Then that could also be a good option for you. Actually, some other people are growing their succulents in a rain or shine location, and some of them don't get problems with that. And actually, some of these succulents, especially the thin-leafed ones, can survive rain or shine rain or shine location, or sun and rain. So some of them can survive that, but some others, those that are more expensive, those that are much more sensitive, they will not like that. So you have to choose what succulents that you're growing, and if you want to grow them outdoors, then pick the type of succulents that grows really well outdoors, and just don't give them semi-protected areas or semi-protected, and just avoid putting them in the semi-protected areas, because really succulents don't like to be in a very humid situation. So I hope that you're getting the idea that I'm sharing here. Now overall, I would say that if you're already growing your succulent for about a year, so if you're growing them, I think that succulent, that right there, that big one, I've been growing that for about a year. So if you've already had that much success with your succulent, then I believe that you will not really have any issues when it comes to the following years, because in a year, your succulent will already be established. They can already handle a lot more heat, and they can already be watered much more often because they have a lot more roots compared if they are new. So if your succulents are much more older, they will last much more longer. So if you manage to make your succulent survive for the first year that you have it, then it will just continue growing on the next years that you have it. So really, the problem that you will have with them is making them survive through their first year. So I would also say this, that if you're a beginner when it comes to succulent, and if you really like them and if you really want to grow them successfully, then you just push through when it comes to growing them for about a year. If they die, even if before it reaches 1 year, you just buy new ones, and then you let it survive, and you keep it, you adjust your care, and then you keep it alive for about a year. And then after that, you will already have enough skills and enough resources to grow your succulents in the long term. So you really just have to survive your first year of growing succulents, but after that first year, you will have continuous success when it comes to growing them. So I would really recommend that you don't quit ahead. So if you're still not very experienced with succulents, and if it's just your first year, just keep growing them even if they die. Adjust your care a little bit here and there, potting mix, sunlight, and temperature, air circulation. If you manage to make them survive for about a year, it will be smooth flowing for you during the next seasons. So I hope that you really like the tips that I gave with you when it comes to growing succulents and the temperatures that they need. I also shared some advice on the other needs that they have, watering and sunlight. So I actually gave a lot of information in this video. Actually, you might notice me here in the Cali Plants channel not posting a lot because I'm currently doing volunteer work, so I'm actually doing something else. So you just have to stay tuned, because I think I will also be producing this shorter type of videos. So I will be producing YouTube shorts. They are much more easier to do than this long format of videos. But I will try as much as I can to produce at least one video, one long type of video, check this one, once a week, so that you have something to watch throughout the week and you have something to research on, something that you can start your studies with when it comes to growing succulents, so that you can have some advice. I hope that you get some tips on this one. So I really hope that you really like the tips that I shared with you. Please make sure to hit the thumbs up if you did, and also please make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. And I think that's about it for this video, guys. I will see you on the next one. Bye bye.